Hey guys, welcome back to the final installment of me going through old sports memorabilia binders. This is one that I found in that little crease over there. It's going to be a short video. There's not much substance in this. This is the last possible binder that I'm not currently still working on. And really, there's not going to be, like I said, that much exciting stuff in here. Obviously labeled ARCA. It's a lot of stats and stuff from when I went to the 2009 race, New Jersey Motoraport Park, the South Jersey Building Trades 150, and there's the logo. It's a lot of statistical stuff that I have for some reason that I didn't even remember I had, but here it is. So we're just going to go through this real quick. Like I said, it's not going to be a 30-minute episode. There's not, it's not going to be a whole lot of stuff, but we'll take a look at it. So here's our entry list from that race. No driver, hometown. Oh, number and then driver. It was like no driver. You have Wayne Peterson of Pulaski, Tennessee. Ken Butler III of Lilburn, Georgia. Tim George Jr. of New York, New York. Patrick Long of We Don't Know. Willie Mullins of Fredericksburg, Virginia. Justin Lofton of Westmoreland, California. Ed Bull of Chapin, South Carolina. Brian Silas of Stort, Florida. Corey Rabinold of Slatington, Pennsylvania. Joey Coulter of Miami Springs, Florida. Allie Owens of Daytona Beach, Florida. Tom Hesser of Cherry Hill, New Jersey. That's close to here. Jeremy Petty of Smolin, Kansas. Steve Arpin of Fort Frances, Ontario. Brad Smith of Shelby Township, Michigan. Jeff Busey of Charlotte, North Carolina. See all of the sponsors. I probably should have done the sponsors with that. Whatever. Wayne Peterson Racing Chevrolet. He is the owner for Ken Butler. He was sponsored by Lone Max, and he drove a Ford. Owner was Jennifer Belmont. Tim George was sponsored by Ruby Tuesday. He drove a Toyota and owned by Eddie Sharp. Patrick Long, Cunningham Motorsports was a sponsor. Drove a Dodge, owned by Carrie Schurrier. Sorry. Willie Mullins, sponsored by BugsyAuto.com. He drove a Chevrolet, owned by Bill Gerhardt. Justin Lofton drove Lofton Cattle. He drove a Toyota, owned by Jessica Sharp. Ed Bull drove for Back in Shape Fitness. Lake Murray Churro drove Ford, owned by Bill Gerhardt. Brian Silas, sponsored by Rockingham Speedway and Holland Pumps, drove Chevrolet, owned by Andy Hillenberg. Corey Rabinold was sponsored by Belmont Racing. Drove a Ford, owned by Jennifer Belmont. Joey Coulter, sponsored by Daryl Gwynn Foundation. Tempest Cycles, drove a Chevy, owned by Joe Coulter. Fun fact, we had a hotel and they were staying in it. We saw him and the crew downstairs eating breakfast. That was interesting. Allie Owens was sponsored by ElectrifyingCareers.com. Drove a Toyota and is owned by Eddie DeHaan. Tom Hesser was sponsored by Cherry Hill Classic Cars. Drove a Ford. Robbie Benton was the owner. Jeremy Petty, sponsored by Hickson Construction, drove a Chevy, owned by Wayne Hickson. Steve Arpin, sponsored by Venturini Motorsports, drove Chevrolet, owned by Kathy Venturini. Brad Smith, sponsored by ApplianceZone.com, drove a Ford, owned by Brad Smith. He still races in ARCA. Jeff Busey, sponsored by Shaver Motorsports, drove a Chevrolet, owned by Wayne Hickson. Oh, we got more. To be announced. I love that driver. Sponsored by Red Lion Oil, drove a Dodge, owned by Kevin Sywinski. Daryl Basham from Henryville, Indiana, was sponsored by Anti-Monkey Butt Powder. Drove a Chevrolet and owned by Daryl Basham himself. Tom Birdie from New Berlin, Wisconsin, was sponsored by CGS Premier State Tuned Customs, drove a Chevy, owned by Bill Venerini. Rob Brent from Shelby Township, Michigan, sponsored by Orchard Chrysler Dodge Jeep, drove a Dodge, owned by Mike Allgaier. Frank Kimmel owns his own team. He's from Clarksville, Indiana, and was sponsored by Ansel Menards. Drove a Ford. James Hilton of Inman, South Carolina, sponsored by Radon.com. Drove a Ford and owned by James Hilton himself again. Spencer Maggard from Eatonton, Georgia, sponsored by Southern Pan Service. Drove a Ford, owned by Ken Trader. To Be Announced was sponsored by Bob Schlatt. I think that's how you pronounce that. Motorsports drove a Ford and owned by Bob Schlatt. Patrick Sheltra from Indianatown, Florida, was sponsored by Buffalo Wings and Rings. Drove a Chevy and owned by Grace Sheltra. Bob Schlatt from Lombard, Illinois, owns his own team there and sponsored himself, Bob Schlatt Motorsports, and drove a Chevy. Parker Kligerman was in the race from Westport, Connecticut, sponsored by Cunningham Motorsports. Drove a Dodge, owner Mark Gibson. Craig Geis from Greenville, North Carolina, sponsored by Greenville Toyota of North Carolina. Drove a Toyota and owned by Eddie Sharp. Nick Igdowski from Long Pond, Pennsylvania, sponsored by Belmont Racing. Drove a Ford, owned by Grant Infinger. Todd Antrikin from Lebanon, Ohio, sponsored by Norm Benning Racing. Drove a Chevy and drove for Norm. Gabby DiCarlo from Phoenix, Arizona, sponsored by Great Clips. Drove a Toyota, owned by Doug Stringer. Jason Basham from Henryville, Indiana, owned by Daryl Basham, who sponsored the car. Daryl Basham Racing. Chevrolet. Chase Mattioli from Long Pond, Pennsylvania, sponsored by Hamilton Racing. Drove a Dodge and owned by Bobby Hamilton Jr. Barry Fitzgerald from Sykesville, Maryland, sponsored by thebusplace.com. Drove a Ford, owned by Wayne Peterson. And finally, Spencer Pompelli from Concord, North Carolina, sponsored by HPT. Drove a Chevy and owned by Robbie Benton. And blank. Is this really all? There's got to be more. Why do we have blanks? Oh, I'm not going to read it, but here's a bio if you want to pause on Steve Arpin from Fort Francis, Ontario, born December 16th, 1983. He is, in fact, a race driver and is married to Trina, apparently. Daryl Basham, Henryville, Indiana, date of birth, March 17, 1949. Self-employed truck driver. Interesting. Tom Birdie from New Berlin, Wisconsin. I feel like this is like some sort of weird dating show. Born September 25th, 1943. Self-employed. Rob Brent, Shelby Township, Michigan. Born February 6, 1987. Driver/student. Ken Butler III. Lilburn, Georgia. Born May 2nd, 1982. Race driver. Joey Coulter. Miami Springs, Florida. June 8th, 1990. Race driver. He was 19 at that time. Gabby DiCarlo from Phoenix, Arizona. July 10th, 1985. Student race car driver. Oh, this actually is a little bit more statistical stuff down there. Maybe some of the other ones did, but I just never noticed. A lot of them that I saw, like for example, I know Joey Coulter was like this, where it was just a little bio up here. Gabby has, that stuff. And Tim over here, Tim George Jr. from New York. That's not too far away from me. December 21st, 1980, race driver. I kind of like how on a few of these, the professions are not race driver. Like, who's that one guy? Like, the second one we came across was like, it was Steve Arpin was, I guess this is in alphabetical order if Arpin's first. Yeah, Daryl Basham, self-employed truck driver. It's just, you gotta love ARCA, honestly. This guy, Craig Geis from Woodbury, New Jersey. April 14th. I have a close friend whose birthday is April 14th. 1981, race driver. Tom Hetzer III, Cherry Hill, New Jersey. May 22nd, 1986, student / race driver. James Hilton. Is this an autograph on the back? Do we actually have something juicy in here that I didn't expect? Anyway, we'll figure out when we flip the page. James Hilton, Inman, South Carolina. August 26, 1934. Team owner / race driver. Just upside down, or? Oh yeah, okay, this is Frank Kimmel. Huh. I didn't know I had a Frank Kimmel autograph, but here it is. Interesting. Frank Kimmel, Clarksville, Indiana. April 30th, 1962, co-owner, Kimmel Racing. It's probably the most in-depth one we've had so far. Look at all that stat. Justin Lofton, Westmoreland, California. February 18th, 1986, race driver. Brack Maggard, Eatonton, Georgia. August 18th, 1946, owner, Southern Pan Services. Chase Mattioli, Long Pond, PA. Yeah, not an efficient way to grab it. October 6, 1989, race driver / student. Allie Owens, Daytona. September 2nd, 1988, race driver. Jeremy Petty, Smolin, Kansas. August 31st, 1982, owner, Billet Race Products. Corey Rabinold, Slaytonton, Pennsylvania. October 14th, 1988, race driver. Bob Schlatt, Mooresville, North Carolina. Oh, we got stats. January 24th, 1950, race team owner, crew chief. Going back 1971 on that. Hey, Schrader, Fenton, Missouri. May 29th, 1955, race driver. Patrick Sheltra, Indiantown, Florida. May 14th, 1986, race driver. And that's it. The autograph was a surprise, but that was cool. Anyway, that's it for this mini-series I've been doing on and off since May is when I started it. And then I took a break because there's a little bit of baseball video I could do. And then when that ended in September, I went back to this. I've taken a few weeks off, both from posting in general, just school and stuff. I just need a little break. And also the last few weeks I've been going out and posting some update videos on some abandoned stadiums, which are now demolished. That's why I made updates on Camden and Newark. So I did that the last couple weeks. So here we are. Ironically, right at the end of the year, we're finishing this series. December 20th. I'm recording this Christmas night, December 25th. Excuse me. So, yeah. That is it for this video. Thanks for watching, and I will see you all later.